If I told you to list the top 5 automakers in the world, who would you put on that list? Toyota, Honda, General Motors, BMW perhaps? All of those are valid for sure, with Toyota objectively being in the #1 spot as far as production goes. But what if I told you about a dark horse in this list? A brand that transcends road vehicles, a brand that has been ridiculed for decades, but despite the criticism and failures has continuously made improvements and even innovations to their philosophy on what manufacturing should be. Would you believe me if I told you the 4th largest automaker in the world is Hyundai? Motherfucker is cold. If you ask me why I love this car, I honestly couldn't give you a solid answer. I'm lying. But it wouldn't be a very quick one, I can tell you that right now. Ask me why I love Hyundai, and I'll probably tell you that it represents who I am to the core as a person. Someone who will fail, someone who will make mistakes, but someone who will also learn from those mistakes and grow beyond those said mistakes. How many times have I said mistakes already? But I'll grow beyond those mistakes and look back only when I want to think about how far I've come from where I was. That's what Hyundai is to me, and that's the reason that I rep them so hard to this fucking day. Yeah, I'm wearing that shit again. I don't give a fuck. But, you know, understandably, if you aren't convinced yet, let me just give you a quick rundown. Alright, so Hyundai, like most well-established businesses, didn't actually start out as Hyundai. In 1940, the Ado service garage was opened by then founder of Hyundai, Chung Yu-jung, I think it was. I don't know how to pronounce that properly, but hey. But off the rip, you could already tell that Hyundai's philosophy was born. The idea that they wanted to have the cheapest prices, but also keep quality and care as a priority. At this time, there was not only a shortage of auto repair shops in Seoul, but the ones that did exist were basically extorting customers with stupidly high prices. And Chung said, nah, fuck that. I'm gonna be the guy that makes the difference. If I wanna have low prices but still have high quality, that's what I'm gonna do. And it did work until it didn't. Chung's shop actually did eventually burn down, took shop equipment with it, took some customer cars even. The entire thing burned to the ground. It was a random accident. I don't know exactly what happened with the fire, but we'll just say that was setback #1. Hold on now. Instead of crumbling under all this new debt, Chung decided to double down and take out another loan to open another shop in an even busier part of the city. And for a hot minute, things were looking up for my guy, but then setback #2 happened. If the 1940s have any sort of significance to you, then you probably paid attention in history class, because obviously this is where World War II comes into play, and Japanese government was actually occupying South Korea at the time, and they eventually took over Chung's garage to turn it into like a steel plant to support the war efforts. But this time, Chung actually had a backup plan. You see, over the past, I want to say, year and a half, he was saving up money, just stacking his bread, and then eventually he had today's equivalent in US dollars, about $17,000 saved up. And then he used this money to go on to open the Hyundai Service Center, which is still not the Hyundai that you see today, but we're getting there. That was him. That was definitely him. See, the Hyundai Auto Service Center was actually open to great success. He was eventually signing 6-figure contracts for all his services. But the one thing he noticed was that construction companies were actually signing for even more than that. I'm talking 7 to 8-figure contracts. And that's when his brain started turning. Before you know it, in 1947, he founded the Hyundai Construction Company, which A lot of people don't even know Hyundai actually still has this construction company to this day. And although it got off to a rough start, by 1950, this company was not only stable, but it was even profiting. But next thing you know, setback 3 occurred, and as you probably expected, this is where the Korean War actually comes into play. And things were actually looking pretty bad for Chung and his brother because they had to leave the business behind. But eventually the United States came over and started posting help wanted ads for construction companies, build barracks for troops and everything like that. And Chung jumped at this opportunity to put his services to use. He went on to build hundreds of barracks for US troops, and I mean, eventually this led to him building barracks for the president, or lodging, I guess. This initiative paid off exponentially because by the time the Korean War had ended, Chung's company was the front runner for every opportunity the US basically gave to Korea for construction. And this eventually led to him taking over the project of restoring the Goryeo Bridge. Needless to say, the project ended up taking way longer than it needed to because he was just hilariously understaffed. His equipment was not the best, and some people actually died during the construction of this bridge. So he was basically the laughing stock of every construction company in the entire country. But to him, he didn't let this get to his head. It was merely an expensive lesson. But it was a lesson well learned, as he would turn this budding relationship with the US into one of the fastest growing companies in South Korea. He went on to become the first business in South Korea's history to take his construction overseas. He was making bids on some of the biggest projects that you could think of. I'm talking billions of dollars in budget. And he did this all within a matter of 2 decades, which is literally nothing in the business world. This company is still young to this day, considering how long Toyota and Honda has been around. And obviously a bit of luck came into play, just like with every success story. He had tax breaks from the Korean government. He had subsidies that they gave him. There was just so many things that led to this being a thing. But that is not meant to discredit his hard work, overcoming adversities. I mean, this man literally went through a war, the destruction of his home country, essentially. I mean, the Korean War was basically devastating for just about everybody involved. But eventually he did get back into his roots, and he came back home to finish what he basically started with the Edu Service Garage. And this is where we get into the creation of this bad boy right here. Yeah. This is where we get into the creation of what we know today. The Hyundai Motor Company was actually founded in 1967, striking a deal with Ford to use some of their vehicles, as well as learn engineering and production techniques from Ford and some of the more established companies overseas. After 6 months, the facility was finally completed, and the Ford, well, technically still a Ford, Cortina was actually produced by Hyundai in Korea. And pretty much predictably, this was not met with immediate success in Korea, despite it actually being sort of successful overseas. But this was not Hyundai's fault. This was more so the core infrastructure of South Korea. The roads were basically stricken with potholes and all that stuff. Once again, Hyundai was a laughing stock of South Korea, and this really wasn't their fault. But my nigga Chung stood 10 toes down. He didn't let that shit faze him whatsoever. Even in the midst of being bombarded with return requests and refund requests from customers because they just didn't like the car, or the car just didn't perform well on Korean roads. And after realizing Ford's intentions of basically monopolizing the Korean car market through the use of Hyundai themselves, Chung actually terminated the contract with Ford in 1974 and began plans to produce his own vehicles. Eventually, Hyundai partnered with Mitsubishi, of all people, for use of their rear axles and their motors, also reaching out to European engineers to help bring life the Hyundai Pony, which, it was okay. But I'm not gonna diminish the success of it. It was the first mass-produced vehicle in Korea, and it was so mass-produced that 4 out of every 10 vehicles sold in Korea was a Hyundai Pony, like specifically that car. Then 1985 rolled around, and with Hyundai's new goal being to break into the freedom market, they unveiled the new Hyundai Excel, which was astonishingly half the price of a new vehicle at the time, on average at least. But this led to 168,000 of them being sold in the US alone, and 1 million vehicles being sold worldwide. Unfortunately though, this is where the narrative of Hyundai's being unreliable pieces of junk started to flourish, I guess. Numerous consumer reports came out about Hyundai's lack of build quality, overall structural rigidity, I guess, and combine that with expensive repairs for these vehicles. Reports spread like wildfire about Hyundai's negligence for its customers. And then once again, Hyundai was the laughing stock of South Korea. But not too long after this, in the 1990s, the Accent, Elantra, and Sonata all were launched. More and more features were being added to them. They were catching up with the American cars and the European cars slightly. They aren't there yet, but they get there eventually. And even in 1998, they went on to acquire Kia Motors, which we all know who Kia is. And with each other's help, they actually went on to become tied with the one and only Honda for second best in brand quality. But despite all of this success, that narrative that Hyundais were basically pieces of junk kept looming over them, and they were basically tired of it. This was the catalyst for them implementing that famous 10-year, 100,000-mile warranty, and essentially all narratives were starting to be shut down. Starting to, at least. But this was the push that they needed to become one of the best-selling car brands of the modern day. Okay, so now you're a little bit up to date on some of the Hyundai lore, and hopefully you're aware now of why I have so much respect for this company. But what about the bread and butter, you know what I'm saying? The meat and potatoes, the creme de la creme. All right, I'm gonna stop. What about the cars? Did they improve in quality? Significantly, yeah. What about styling? I say for sure, yeah, they did. What about features? I say they're on par with the best in the industry. And okay, lastly, what about reliability? Well, I say they're bar none. Let me quit lying. At the very least, it's complicated. All right, so when it comes to reliability, I think it comes down to two major factors, and that's engineering and consumer knowledge. Looking at who Hyundai's main target audience is, which is younger drivers, it's easy to see how that could turn into an issue really, really fast. What's the most common factor in younger people? We're broke. Or at the very least, we aren't established enough to be willing to take out a $30,000 to $40,000 car loan on a brand new vehicle, especially with the exorbitant interest rates that we have today. Thus, our options in the market are pretty much limited, especially if we want something with the latest tech, all the available features and the creature comforts and all that. We just don't really have that many options to choose, and that's where Hyundai comes into play. But I do say all that to say, do you think the people who are trying to save as much money as possible on a brand new vehicle are also going to pay $5,000 to $6,000 a year on maintenance and repairs? No, at least I know I'm fucking not. But let's not also forgo the fact that Hyundai is still utilizing the GDI technology in their engines to this day, and I can't say I blame them, because the technology does have its uses and its benefits, but at the same time, people don't know how to maintain these cars. And I say at the end of the day, if you want these cars to last on the road, if you want customers to keep buying these cars, you have to go with the tech that is not only gonna last when people don't have the automotive knowledge, but something that's also gonna perform well. And if there was some universal word to describe Hyundai's design philosophy, I'd say it would just simply be unique. And to be honest, they've been on that wave for a minute now. I mean, since the fucking Tiburon. I don't know if y'all know what that is, but hey, my hardcore Tiburon fans out there, y'all already know. But ask anybody who's ever owned one, and I say 95% of them are gonna say that was one of the most fun cars that they've ever owned. And I'm not even trolling, like the Tiburon community is actually solid as fuck. But I'm gonna cut now to one of the most important vehicles in Hyundai's entire fleet, which is right next to me. Before I get into how weird this 3-door coupe hatchback motherfucker, I don't care. Before I get into how this became the catalyst for the what I call Hyundai Renaissance, we just need to inch back just a tiny little bit and appreciate where it came from. In efforts to keep up with the era of the hot hatch, where you had the Golf GTI, the WRX, and the Civic Type R, Hyundai decided to jump straight into the deep end, unveiling the HND 3 concept. I don't know why they named it that. They unveiled this at SEMA, and this eventually went on to become the Veloster. And the very first batch was strictly naturally aspirated. It was a 1.6 liter. However, the cool version of the Veloster, which is the one that's standing right next to me, is actually the one that came in 2013, where you got a turbo option with a 1.6 liter, and you got a 6-speed manual transmission, 7-speed DCT optional, and it brought the horsepower all the way up into the 200s, which is where this thing needs to be considering how heavy it is. Of course, this Hyundai was no exception. It still came with the GDI engine, which infamous and everything, but funnily enough, in Brazil, in the Middle East, you could actually get this car without the GDI technology, which I don't understand why that's even a thing. It brought the horsepower down a little bit, but more reliability, like, I mean, I'll take that. And although this car got admittedly a shit ton of unnecessary promotion, like this car did not need to be in as many commercials. I think if this was in The Walking Dead at one point, like it just did not need to be promoted this much, especially for a brand new car. The Star Child was still, and I think It's still one of my favorite cars to this day, the Genesis Coupe. This car holds a particularly special place in my heart just because it was one of the first cars that I ever fucking wanted. Like, we had gotten to a point where my friends and I were getting pretty into cars, and we were starting to actually consider getting sports cars for ourselves. At the time, my mindset was in the luxury kind of sport coupes, like the LC 500, the Mercedes AMG GT, the Dodge Viper even. Like, those were my favorite cars. I loved the look of those, the long sleek body lines and everything like that. These were the kind of cars that my eyes gravitated towards. But obviously, I'm a fresh high school graduate. I'm broke as shit. There's no way I'm finna afford a fucking 911 Turbo S or a Dodge Viper or anything like that. So literally none of these options were realistic at the time. But after having an existential crisis over the fact that I didn't buy Bitcoin when I was 8, I started doing some more research, and I eventually found some affordable coupes that were, you know, realistic for me. Lo and behold, I find the Genesis Coupe, and I just fall in love with it. And the thing that I noticed off the rip was the fact that they were going for basically dirt cheap. I'm talking like 6 to maybe 8K for like clean, relatively low mileage examples. This is on Facebook Marketplace, so it's a toss up on that shit. The 3.8 V6 version with the manual transmission was arguably the first dream car that I had that was like realistic for me to achieve. The styling was sexy. The powertrain was basically perfect for what you needed. You could still slide it, you know, with some slight modifications, but the fact that it was Korean made and there weren't too many people that had it means that it was unique to me, and it was something that I could make my own. I could stand out at every car meet. There wouldn't be too many people that had it. I could have a nice connection with the local people that did, because, you know, we're a brotherhood. There's a small amount of us. And at the time, the only cars that really stood in its class were cars like the G37 or 370Z. There were just so many of those that I just didn't want to be in that clique. Hyundai soon relinquished the Genesis brand name into its own separate entity and allowed it to make its own cars. I think they're actually a completely separate brand now. Sometimes they don't even share certain parts. They're developing their own technologies and everything like that. But this did, however, leave a hole in Hyundai's performance lineup of cars. At this point, the Genesis, the sedan, and the coupe were basically the only performance cars that they really had outside of the Veloster Turbo, which, you're not really getting much with that. The coupe and sedan stopped being produced in 2016, and then the Veloster actually stopped being produced temporarily in 2017, but it was for a specific reason. You see, Hyundai realized that in order to break into the performance market and actually give it a genuine shot, they couldn't just half-ass it. They actually had to give some sort of effort. They had to have DNA. They had to have history along with it. And the big boys like Honda, Nissan, and Toyota, they had their established racing pedigree. And you're probably also thinking, where are they going to get this experience from? Well, allow me to introduce you to a certain someone. Alright guys, I am not gonna lie, it was way too cold outside. I was not finna do that shit. I know y'all see the skin coat. Nah, I'm playing. That certain someone that I was talking about was actually Albert Biermann. Pretty sure that's what his actual name is. Yes, Biermann. He's actually a pretty big figure in the engineering aspect of the automotive world, especially over in Germany. First joining BMW in 1983 as a suspension test engineer, and then he quickly made his way up to becoming overseer of chassis, drivetrain, and electronic systems, but not for just every BMW ever. He was specifically in charge of the M cars. And I'm assuming you all know what BMW M is, so I'm not even gonna give you a breakdown on that. He served as vice president of the M division up until 2015, I want to say, which is when he made his sudden controversial move to go over to Hyundai, and he became vice president of their high performance motor vehicle testing there. And for whatever reason, I still don't know to this day, this was such a blow to the German engineering community, I guess. But this was due to many people feeling like Biermann sold his soul, which is crazy to say about transitioning car companies. But now that I think about it, that's probably how niggas felt when Brown went to Miami. So, you know what? more power to him. Albert then went on to expand the already existing N division at Hyundai, along with Klaus Koster from AMG. Yes, that AMG. Yeah, he's there too. And notice I said already existing because, contrary to popular belief, the N division didn't actually start with the Veloster N, nor did it start with the overseas exclusive that actually came before the Veloster, the i30N. See, what a lot of people don't know is that the N division actually started back in 2012. The N nameplate, or I guess its badging, was kind of introduced with the WRC entry that Hyundai made, which is specifically why the i30N was the first car to be given that badge. But of course, what we're all probably here for, the prodigal son made his return in 2019, and man, and you know what? I'm finna read directly off the script because I don't want to miss a single detail, bro. The Veloster N, the Veloster N, a 2-liter turbocharged front-wheel drive Nürburgring-born track weapon, was unveiled to the public in what could only be described as a spectacular fashion. Most people didn't really know how to feel. Like, on paper, the Veloster N had the credentials, like it had the R&D, the rigorous testing, all the engineering, and as much as people didn't want to take Hyundai seriously, like, still there was just no denying that this car was fucking incredible. Like, Hyundai had finally done it. They made that car, and not only did they make that car, they made it affordable as fuck for what you're getting in that package. Like, sure, some of the interior bits are a little like quality wise, but everything is up to date. It has everything you need. Apple CarPlay, it's got the Apple CarPlay. It's got a great transmission. Trust me, I've driven both the DCT and the manual. The DCT is low-key a sleeper. Like, that motherfucker is fast as shit. It has cracks and burbles from the factory. Like, factory exhaust literally just like, I'm gonna put a sound clip, but yes, you got all of that and then some that I didn't even list for $28,000 MSRP. And I know that sounds like a lot, but when you consider what this car was going up against at the time, there was really only one genuine competitor to the Veloster N, and that was the Civic Si. And in my opinion, strictly just like bias, because I haven't driven the Civic Si, or at least, yeah, I haven't driven the FK whatever. I don't know the chassis codes for Civics, but yeah, whatever generation the FK8 Type R is, like the same generation that, whatever generation the FK8, whatever generation the FK8 Type R is, the then same generation Civic Si. I haven't driven that one. I've driven the FL5 generation. I don't know if they have the same number or what. Again, I don't know Civics like that, but yeah, I didn't drive the previous generation Civics, so I don't know what the driving experience is like, but from what I heard in multiple reviews of the cars, like multiple comparisons actually, the Civic Si just didn't have that raw feel to the driving experience that the Veloster N will give you. It's nowhere near as refined or as peppy. There's not a lot of feedback that you get from the car. Like the Civic Si, obviously it's meant to be a smooth driver, something that you can push when you need to, but it also still handles as a daily comfortable car. The Veloster N does the same thing. The Veloster N is actually a very comfortable car. It's practical. It's a hatchback. I mean, come on. It's got 3 doors, so you know, if you got passengers in the back, they can still get in comfortably without having to wait for you to adjust the seat and everything. Overall, most of the car experts that I saw review this car just simply agree that the Veloster N was just more fun. Like, there was no way you could get in one of these and not catch yourself smiling like a child at one point. The party doesn't even end here, because in August of 2020, the Elantra N came out and they doubled down, basically letting the world know, like, hey, this N thing isn't gonna be some come and go type of endeavor. Like, we're here to stay with this shit. And not even a year after the Elantra N came out, they introduced the Kona N, and pretty much Hyundai's version of their holy trinity was basically complete. They had the fun coupe, they had their sporty sedan, and they also had a sporty SUV. They had something for everybody to enjoy, and honestly, all 3 of those cars are fun as fuck to drive. I barely got any seat time with the Kona N, but the Elantra N I've driven a couple times. Veloster N I've driven plenty of times. Those cars are great. But this holy trinity, I'm still putting that in quotes because I know it might be cringe to say Hyundai has a holy trinity, but I digress. This holy trinity established Hyundai's N badge as something that wasn't going to be feared, but it was going to be respected. And while yes, sadly, the Veloster N's production run was cut pretty short back in 2022, I want to say, I personally will always view the Veloster as the best N car. in my opinion, of course. I haven't driven any of the updated Elantra Ns. I don't know what the driving experience is like in those, because I know they got a little refresh, they got a facelift and everything, but as far as I know, Veloster N, it's that car for them, at least until the Envision 74 comes out. But so if you watch my last video, which, man, the support on that, dude, that shit is almost overwhelming. Thank you to those who did. But if you watched the last video, then you probably remember the specific section where I mentioned the presence of EVs becoming more and more prevalent. Well, Hyundai being the third largest automaker, yeah, they're obviously gonna follow that trend. If anything, they have been privy to this change for, I want to say, a decade almost now, seeing as how they had been shakily improving their EV technology over the past couple of years to ensure that they were up to snuff with the industry standard. Basically, all of this research and development and improving their technologies pretty much led to them creating one of the most impressive feats of engineering that I've seen. It's something that's different, it's unique. It takes a risk, for sure. It for sure takes a risk, but I think it paid off very well. They made a cool goddamn EV. I will be the first to admit I did not like this car, or at least I didn't want to. But of course, that was me and my, old head mentality. I didn't want to adapt to the change. I didn't want to adapt to the times. And of course, I hadn't even driven the car. So this was pretty much me not wanting to believe that an EV could ever come close to capturing that raw, powerful combustion engine feel. And like I said, I still have not driven the car to this day. Where the fuck are you going to do that at? I mean, but I've seen some diehard, like hardcore enthusiasts who are straight gasoline heads. They praise the fuck out of this vehicle. I'm talking people like that dude in blue. His review was just raving about it. Doug DeMuro actually had a pretty positive opinion of this car. It's like those guys have done basically nothing but sing its praise. Like, Hyundai managed to turn one of the most blasphemous gimmicks of EVs prior and flip it on its head and turn it into something that average enthusiasts or people who aren't even enthusiasts could enjoy. Like, there's so many driver focused features in this car that it kind of makes my head spin. Like, for starters, the one thing that people actually give a fuck about, the specs. Okay, there's really no sugarcoating it. Nigga, this thing puts out 641 fucking horsepower once you put it into Ingram shift, which, that's Hyundai lingo right there, bro. Y'all know nothing about that. This 641 horsepower can be either distributed to the front, the rear, or all four fucking wheels. It really just depends on your damn mood. And mind you, the base Ioniq 5 is supposed to compete with cars like the RAV4, the Mazda CX-30, like cars in that kind of bracket. But then you have all of this shit combined with a big ass wing, or spoiler I guess, and 6-piston Brembo brakes, nigga. This is one of those rare occasions where an outlier from something that's almost unanimously hated actually ends up being pretty cool in hindsight. Of course, the Ioniq 5N being almost $70,000 doesn't make the reality of my last video any less prevalent now. That reality being that fun is just too expensive to have in the 2020s. But I do think it speaks volumes on the potential look of the market in the future, and that the boring quote-unquote EVs aren't going to be the only things that we have available to us. Like, we might actually have something that's tailored to people like you and me, the enthusiasts. And the future enthusiasts from, like, I want to say 20-25 years from now, they're probably going to embrace this EV shift even more, because these are the cars that they're going to grow up on. And for Hyundai of all brands to be the front runners of this cool EV revolution, yes, I know Rimac is a thing, but one, that's not practical, two, that's not realistic, and three, it doesn't have 3 doors, so it's not as cool as a Veloster. That's why I didn't get one. Regardless of what your opinions are of Hyundai's quality, reliability, cool factor, or whatever dumbass metric you have, it's virtually impossible to ignore the grind from being the laughingstock of its own home country to growing into a worldwide automotive and construction titan. It's kind of ridiculous to even say this, considering a 641 horsepower RAV4 adjacent crossover vehicle is already batshit insane. But Hyundai got even wilder after the Ioniq 5N. When they announced it just makes my brain hurt even thinking about it. They announced this. The Envision 74, a 670 horsepower hybrid, not just a regular hybrid, hydrogen powered, DeLorean inspired, rear wheel drive, damn near drift missile. I don't know if I'm alone in this line of thinking. Maybe I'm just too hype on the Hyundai juice. Like maybe I'm just too off that shit. But I really do think if Hyundai does put out exactly what they promised in this concept, at least, this very well could be Hyundai's first supercar. If they can even put out 80% of what they promised this vehicle is going to be, I honestly do see this being Hyundai's solidified entry into the supercar world, because there's no way, you know, the average person is going to have access to this. Like, it's just too crazy of a car in general, engineering wise. But if you were paying attention, you might have noticed that I use hydrogen powered, or I put emphasis on that. In theory, hydrogen as a fuel source seems like the most eco-friendly option, at least out of all the ones available to us. The drawbacks of gasoline and diesel have basically been overanalyzed at this point for the past century, and the environmental damage that comes from lithium mining is just as bad, if not worse, than gasoline powered cars. So now we're basically searching for an alternative to the alternative, and this is where we come down to the conclusion of hydrogen. The only emissions that you get from hydrogen powered cars is water vapor. The driving experience is basically indistinguishable from EVs, at least in terms of comfort and smoothness. And one of the biggest advantages that they have over EVs is that they only take about 5 to 6 minutes to charge. So Keyokei, I hear you say, why in the world are hydrogen vehicles not more popular than EVs already? Well, the first and most prevalent issue is the absolute lack of hydrogen fueling stations in the country. California actually has the most fueling stations out of everyone, but it's only like 60. Keep in mind, they were supposed to have at least 100 by now, and the ones that do exist aren't all operational. So it's actually less than 60 that you can use for refuel. But let's say there were at least 50,000 hydrogen fueling stations nationwide. Off the top of your head, how much do you think it costs to fill your car with pure hydrogen? Whatever you said, I guarantee it's wrong. It's the equivalent of about $8.50 per gallon of gasoline, bro. Mind you, the average cost of charging an EV is about equal to $1 or maybe $2 per gallon of gasoline. And to make matters worse, somehow True Zero, California's largest hydrogen supplier, raised their prices per kilogram to $36 fucking dollars, and that's not an exaggeration. From dead empty, it would literally cost you $180 to fill a Toyota Mirai. Oh, but that's like a marginal increase, I hear you say. Nigga, it was 3 years ago, bruh. 3 years, bro. It was $13 per kilogram. Are you serious? Okay, I won't lie and say I didn't get a little sidetracked right there, but we locked in now. I brought up all that hydrogen stuff just so people don't unfairly criticize Hyundai if or when the Envision 74 comes out and it doesn't have that exact powertrain that they promised, or at the very least power output isn't exactly what they hoped it would be. And while yes, Hyundai isn't a stranger to the hydrogen car game, the reality of applying that technology into something this impractical, in the grand scheme of things, it just seems like a recipe for disaster. Even if you do pull off this feat and you get all the power numbers that you wanted, the reliability and the drivability of this vehicle is probably going to be non-existent simply because of the fuel source. But in the back of my mind, I can't help but be reminded of Hyundai's most prominent and proficient skill, and that's being their ability to adapt and overcome, as well as innovate and go against the norm. So maybe the Envision 74 doesn't come out to be the machine that Hyundai gassed it up to be. Maybe it costs too much for people who actually care about it to afford, or maybe it simply doesn't perform to the level of its, design and looks. It still comes back to that same philosophy. Hyundai is no stranger to failure. They do it all the fucking time, but they are also very familiar with overcoming those same tough losses. And for my anime and manga fans, I'll try to make this comparison. Not only in sales, but just brands as a whole. I feel like Toyota kind of embodies who Sukuna is from JJK. They're traditional, they're a powerhouse, they have legendary status in their respective spaces. Sukuna's a legendary sorcerer slash curse, and Toyota's a legendary automaker. Volkswagen, I would say, is Gojo, a legendary titan in its own right through the inheritance of other powerful resources, leader of an insanely powerful group that through a combined effort could take down the seemingly unbeatable powerhouse, which is Toyota. And as for Hyundai, I would probably say their best comparison is Maharajah, and I can already hear you like disagreeing with me, being like, oh, but Yuji would be a better comparison, blah blah blah. Hyundai, well, I guess more so its founder, has not only recovered but grown bigger from a burned down shop, a hostile takeover from a foreign government, World War II, the physical and economic destruction of its own country, and the back-end failure of its then biggest project. So when you look at Maharaga's main and most prominent abilities, its first are recovery and adaptation. I think the best example of this is when Hyundai was getting absolutely barbecued by its customers for its lack of quality control, and in turn it was losing sales. So instead of crumbling under the pressure of bankruptcy, Hyundai understood that better quality parts weren't going to happen overnight. So they then announced the 10-year 100,000 mile warranty, and sales basically 180. Oh, but Thor, I'm about sick and fucking tired of you interrupting me, nigga. Just sit your dumb ass down and let me learn you something, boy. I know Yuji takes a beating and he keeps fighting too. Like, that's his thing too. However, at least for 95% of the entire series, Yuji did not know how to recover. But not only that, Yuji didn't really have anything, again, for 95% of the series, he didn't have anything to hit people back whenever he got knocked down, outside of maybe a black flash every once in a while. Maharaga, though, if you're knowledgeable, is equipped with this sword that is capable of outputting positive energy, which in the verse of JJK is pretty much an insta-kill if you get hit with it. And while I'm not implying that Hyundai has anything of that caliber right now, the thing that I'm drawing comparisons to is rarity of something like positive energy in JJK to the rarity of something unique and quirky like the Envision 74, the Ioniq 5N, the Veloster N, and even outside of the actual narrative of JJK, Maharaga isn't really talked about in comparison fights or anything. Like, some like brought up a decent amount, I guess, but it's never really one of the big three that you really have when you're having a conversation about JJK. And it's really the same with Hyundai when you're talking about cars, because nobody takes Hyundai serious, or at least they don't take them seriously until they literally grab your attention with a cool car like the Envision 74. And maybe you aren't, you know, big into anime or whatever, and that whole section just pissed you off. If you stuck around to watch it, I can put that into NBA terms for you. So Toyota, that's LeBron, came into the game with the OGs and was basically dominant from early on, and then went on to outlast the OGs and dominate in an entirely different era. Volkswagen, I would say their closest comparison is probably Kareem or Jordan, powerhouse winners that fostered an environment of winning and led a team of winners around. But Hyundai, and this might shock you because I know y'all got some people in y'all head. I know y'all thinking probably Wemby or maybe Ant, but in my honest opinion, when I see Hyundai, I think of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, a relatively young, quiet, timid voice in the space, but so consistent and driven to achieve greatness that when they do finally decide to like turn up a bit, no matter what team you're rooting for, you can't help but just like gravitate your eyes toward them. And while they haven't quite won it all yet, they're not at the pinnacle, there isn't really any signs of them slowing down at this point. And it seems like all they need is just that one final push to send them over the edge into the stratosphere of greatness. So I gotta sit up for this. After I don't know how many hours and days mulling over this script and not knowing how I'm gonna put into words what this brand means to me, I think I finally understand the gravity that they have. And even if it isn't this deep for every Hyundai supporter, I can basically almost guarantee it's not. I think when you look into it, I think you can feel the hunger from its engineering department to develop cutting edge or high performance vehicles, as well as the passion and love for art and craftsmanship from their design team, who are just trying to create unique and interesting concepts that stand out from the regular traffic that you see on roads. All of that combines to breed this environment of excitement for the future, which is damn near impossible to find in this era of society. Everybody thinks the world is doomed, which it might be, but it's a breath of fresh air to see a car come from a company and be like, I wonder what they're gonna do next. You know, the future for a lot of people looks really bleak, and I'm not saying Hyundai is the only company garnering this sort of curiosity, but I do certainly think they're the biggest, maybe outside of Toyota, that is garnering curiosity, and I personally will stand on that until they prove me otherwise. And of course, with the announcement of Hyundai and Nissan's merger, who is also bringing Mitsubishi along with them, this inevitably means that their marriage will make them the new third largest automaker, knocking Hyundai down to the number 4 spot. But does that mean that everything I said in this video is invalid and I'm a fraud? Shit, man. But seriously, I might be coping when I say this, but I don't think they necessarily count. Like, sales and revenue wise, I honestly think it'll be a back and forth between Hyundai and this new merger. But with Nissan essentially being forced to jump from their sinking ship and Honda being forced to lend out a free life raft to save them, I think this was less of a strategic move that would benefit every party involved and more of a plea and a cry for help from Nissan and an assertion from the Japanese government to basically say, hey, we're not gonna let this company that's basically been a staple in Japanese culture and economy just crumble to the ground like this. You need to do something about it. Like, basically what I'm trying to say is I don't think Hyundai no longer being in the top 3 diminishes anything that they've done over the past 10 years, nor will it diminish anything that they do in the future. It's simply just business at the end of the day, and we all know business is a numbers game. If anything, this is Hyundai's chance to prove once again that they're a force to be reckoned with in this industry, and the way that they can do that is by simply making better products than this new 3-headed kaiju of an auto group. But that is enough yapping from me. I seriously cannot thank you enough if you sat through this, what I think will be even lengthier yap session than my last video. If you did make it this far, you could leave like a pink or purple heart somewhere in your comment. I literally try to read every single one that I get. I might miss 1 or 2 of those, but I'm always on top of my comments. I have notifications on my phone, so even if I'm not at my computer, I still try to respond to comments as soon as possible. And please do not think I'm ignoring the success of my last video. I just didn't want to take enough time in the part that actually mattered. Like, I don't care if me saying it now kills the retention at the end of the video. I'm not, that's not what I'm doing this video for. My ultimate goal is to build a community of enthusiasts or people who are just curious about shit. People who share a deeper than surface level love for anything. It doesn't have to just be cars. It doesn't have to be automotive in general. If you're a total geek, goober, nerd about just anything, I want to know. I want to hear about it. I want to know your story. I want to hear your passion. I want to converse with you about it. So I mean, to see all those comments on my last video, which I'm still getting comments like to this day, like as soon as I stop recording, I'm about to respond to more comments. But I mean, yeah, there were people telling me about the origin story of when they got their cars, sharing experiences that they had at meets and events. Like, literally all that meant the world to me, bro. Like, I got emotional at one point. Like, shout out to the guy who DM'd me on Discord. I don't know if you guys knew you could do that, but I'll put my Discord. Actually, I'll put it right there. Yeah, you can just reach out to me on Discord if you want to just talk about some shit. I'm trying to use that app more because I feel like if there's anywhere you could build a strong community, it's on Discord. Getting all that positive feedback and all that encouragement, there's a lot of people telling me to keep going with these types of videos. Hearing that was really, it was really moving to me because I don't know if you guys peeped the rest of the videos on my channel, but I had not uploaded in a whole year, and so I was having fear, I was having anxiety, I was hesitating to even work on that last video. But it was nice to put my thoughts and opinions out somewhere and have so many people in droves just interact with it. Like, I honestly wouldn't care if it was negative or positive. It's just the fact that people actually cared enough to leave an opinion. That was so reassuring to me, and that's exactly what I needed, and that's the drive that I'm going to use to keep pushing with this YouTube stuff, because I like talking about stuff. Clearly, yeah, I just like having a back and forth discussion. I'm a debater. I like to have dialogues with people, and it's nice when, you know, you have a dialogue with somebody and nothing that you say falls on deaf ears. So again, I just want to thank you guys for, I don't know, just stopping by, lending your time, because I know time is a limited resource that everybody would like to have more of, but it's just something that you can't create. So you deciding to spend your time watching my video, my stupid little video about car culture, like that's touching, man. I love y'all. With that being said, I'm out. Peace. Whew, let's fucking go.